A few years ago, Tintantum had just been through a rough divorce from their high school sweetheart. Their best friend had taken to distracting them by taking long road trips. One morning, they were on their way to Carlsbad, New Mexico when they paused alongside a river dam. They were drinking cider and snacking when the pair decided to explore the dried riverbed. It was obvious that they weren't the first ones to go trekking through the riverbed. The pair could see human, canine, and feline footprints in the mud. They then recalled starting to feel an odd sensation, like they were being watched. Their friend caught the riders' attention and called them over. There was a bone in the ground, what they now believed was a spinal cord. At first they thought it was a beef or pork bone on some kind. They continued looking around the riverbed when they found a strange rust-colored rock sticking out from the sand. When they got closer, they realized it was a half-buried little girl's shoe. The Reddit user stepped back and ran forward, preparing to kick the shoe. Suddenly, they heard a little girl's voice shout, "No. Don't, please." They looked around but didn't see anyone besides themselves and their friend. The friend asked why they stopped, and they replied, "Didn't you hear that little girl?" Both confused, they decided to shrug it off and continued on their way. Meanwhile, the feeling that someone was watching them grew stronger. A few minutes later, they spotted another bone. Now, they began to get scared. The bone was clearly human. The friend called the non-emergency police number for Carlsbad, and they reported what they saw. 1 week later, they received a call from their friend that the Carlsbad police had called to report the bones they found were indeed human. During the investigation, the two were questioned and eventually informed that the rust-colored rock actually wasn't a rock at all, but the shell of a pickup truck that had disappeared along with the family of 3 it had been carrying. A man, a woman, and their daughter. It made the Reddit user think back to the girl's shoe sticking out of the mud and the voice they heard. Could the little girl have spoken directly to them? Last year, a Reddit user went to a friend's house for a party. Around 1 in the morning, the group decided to use a Ouija board. The Reddit user was the only one who believed in accounts of the paranormal, so she was hesitant when her friends brought out the board. But instead of giving her friends more reasons to tease her when it came to the paranormal, she acted as if she didn't believe in such activity. They began asking the board questions. They started with a few normal questions, and nothing really exciting happened. Then someone asked if the spirit wanted to hurt them, and it responded with only one. The group started to get creeped out at this point, and rightfully so. When one friend asked the natural follow-up question, who, the board spelled out Natasha, the Reddit user's full name. It should be noted that she doesn't care for their full name and has everyone call her Tasha instead. Tasha then left the room while her friends continued playing, but found out later that night that the group forgot to say goodbye to the board. Anyone familiar with a Ouija board knows that closing the interaction with the spirit is crucial before stopping use of the board. Needless to say, she was nervous. After this, Tasha has no memory of the night. She only remembers getting a migraine and nosebleeds. Her friends took videos of her acting strangely, speaking with a changed voice, and a few instances of her talking in other languages. However, that night wasn't the only time this happened. In the days following, Tasha's parents reported the same things happening. Once again, she remembered nothing but migraines and nosebleeds. About 2 weeks later, she was back to normal. Or so she thought. Tasha was suddenly hospitalized for an excruciating pain in her kidney so bad that it almost shut down. The doctors tried everything but couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then, on the day she was scheduled for surgery, the pain suddenly stopped. 1 day later, Tasha was released. Since that incident, she has never felt like she was truly alone. Sometimes, she feels someone grabbing her hands or neck, making it difficult to breathe. Tasha has always believed in the paranormal, but this experience made it far more real for her. In 2013, a girl and her friends decided to make a Ouija board. Her best friend lives about a 45-minute drive from the closest store and nearest town, so there wasn't much to do. They'd spent the day watching movies but eventually got bored, so the user, her friend, the friend's boyfriend and his friend decided to make the board. About a week before they made the board, the two friends had been staying alone at the house when the Reddit writer woke at 6 a.m. to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway nearing the bedroom. She tried to wake her friend, but it was no use, she was a heavy sleeper. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The writer waited, holding her breath, for the door to open, but it never did. The next few hours she spent awake, waiting for something to happen. When both girls were finally awake by 11 that morning, before either left the room, she told her friend what had happened the night before. And what her friend said in response chilled her to the bone. She said that for years she'd been hearing the same footsteps and that they had always stopped right outside her bedroom. No one else had heard the footsteps until the rider. That night, they made their Ouija board. The group were messing around with it, not getting any real responses when they suddenly heard a loud bang in the back on the house. They decided to stop for the night. The friend left to drive the other two home, leaving the Reddit user alone at the house. Being alone after hearing the loud noise and the footsteps made her nervous, so she turned on the television for a distraction while she waited for her friend to return. In the middle of the opening credits, the television froze and started making loud buzzing noises. She tried to turn off the TV, but the remote wouldn't work. Then she tried unplugging it, but it kept going. Thoroughly freaked out, she went outside to wait for her friend to get back. At this point, she had started shaking and crying and texted her friend explaining what had happened. Then the dog started barking at the living room door, viciously growling and snarling like they saw something no human could. 30 minutes later, her friend finally arrived back home. Both girls could hear the television from the porch, but when they went inside, it had completely shut off and was still unplugged. Neither are sure exactly what happened, but they're certain it was some kind of malevolent spirit. The man has always been into the paranormal and has experienced a fair number of encounters throughout their life. Recently married, they and their spouse, Charlie, moved into a beautiful little house in a quiet neighborhood. They had only been living there a short time when they started noticing strange occurrences. The first happened while Charlie was upstairs in bed and they were downstairs watching television. Suddenly, he ran into the living room and asked if they had just been in the bedroom. They answered no, and Charlie panicked. He said that as he had been lying in bed, someone had pushed the blanket up so his feet were exposed and a cold hand had caressed his foot. To avoid the spirit, they moved their room to a different bedroom in the house, but the activity continued. They heard heavy footsteps going up and down the stairs, bowls and pans would spin clockwise on the counter, dark full-bodied figures would walk past their bedroom door and vanished, a knife was once lifted and thrown across the kitchen by an unseen force, and the dogs would bark into the corners of the house. Once they even looked up into the window of the master bedroom and saw an elderly woman staring down at them. Eventually, the young couple had enough and talked with their neighbors to learn about the history of the house. They learned that the house had been built in the 1970s, and the elderly lady who had owned the house before them died at the age of 101. The two had no doubt this woman was the spirit tormenting the home, so the writer decided to go upstairs and make peace. They informed the spirit that they intended to remain in the house, and they promised to keep it nice. They offered to help her cross over, but also said she was welcome to stay if her presence became more peaceful. Since then, the couple has been living peacefully in the home, and the old woman occasionally makes herself known. About 2 weeks ago, a young man's little sister began hearing voices. She said it's a deep and masculine voice that calls to her at night in her room, telling her to come outside. It comes from outside in the middle of their yard. One day, their parents went out and the Reddit user, their two little sisters, and their friend stayed home alone. That night, they saw something moving in the small patch of trees in their backyard. Telling the younger girls to stay inside, they went to investigate but found nothing. On their way back inside, something threw them over 5 feet into the air. They scrambled to their feet and ran inside, losing a shoe in the process. After cowering inside for a few minutes, they realized they needed that shoe for work the next day. So, they ventured back outdoors. This time they came prepared, bringing their dog with them for protection, but he refused to follow them into the backyard. As quickly as they could, they grabbed their shoe and ran back inside. Finally, back indoors, they asked the elder of their sisters to look at their back because it felt like it was burning. She pulled up their shirt and screamed. There were several long scratches running down the user's back. The four then went out to the front porch while the youngest went back inside to retrieve something, but came back a few seconds later, saying someone was looking into their back window. The only problem was that, in order for her to have seen someone in the window, that person would have had to have been over 7 feet tall. Now all thoroughly freaked out, they decide to remain on the porch until one of their parents came home. After a few minutes passed, they heard heavy footsteps running toward the front yard from the side of the house where the driveway extends. Gravel flew as though it was being kicked up, but nothing was there. They went back inside until their mother got home. She blessed the area where the Reddit user was attacked and their sister's body and spirit. Whatever the thing was, it didn't appear to be able to get inside the house. The user and their sisters still believe it's hanging around the house to this day.